Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, September 30th, 2025. The long-awaited end of the fiscal year, I guess. The long counted down to, anyway, end of the fiscal year. So, what? I think I saw a countdown clock earlier that said something in the order of 15 hours to shut down. Where are we here? In 12 hours will be 9 o'clock. And yeah, so about 15 hours left till midnight, and the clock turns over, and the calendar turns over to October 1st. And then everybody changes their names on social media to spooky Halloween names. And, also the government shuts down. So that's what it looks like is happening at, I was going to say at some point today. No, it's at a particular point tomorrow. But you get the idea. By the time we speak here again, we'll either be in shutdown or there will have been some miracle performed. I think the only way to get it done at this point, given that the House hasn't bothered to come back into session, strategically, they didn't want to be in a position to be asked to compromise and change the CR that they put forth, and they wanted to force the Senate to take it or leave it, as I mentioned the other day. Just as a guess, well, first of all, the fact was this: the Senate had opted to leave it and said, no thanks, we're not interested in passing the one that the House gave us, so we're also not passing their own. I guess someone made a path for a Democratic alternative to be offered. And this is a regular exercise whenever there's budgeting or spending bills. The majority will frequently give the minority the opportunity to put its ideas forward in a ritual murder of those ideas. But anyway, the Senate did not act or pass anything, and the only method of avoiding a shutdown at this point would be for the Senate. We were just musing about this the other day. The other day being Monday, because it's only Tuesday now, that the only way for the Senate to do anything would be to come back and vote to reconsider either or both of the CR packages brought forth. Of course, the only one that would be effective would be to bring forward the House version of it. If you pass a different version, Democratic written or otherwise, then it has to go to the House, and they're not here to take care of it anyway. So basically, a vote to reconsider the vote on rejecting the House's CR could take place. I don't know whether maybe it took place yesterday. I don't know whether they tried to do it yesterday or they'll try to do it I was going to say again today, but you can't just keep bringing back motions to reconsider these things. There are, and insofar as there is any strict rule in the Senate about anything, it's against the rules to bring it back a second time, except, of course, by unanimous consent. You can always do that. You can do anything by unanimous consent. So it's entirely possible that they may. Who knows? As a PR stunt, they may ask unanimous consent to reconsider the vote and then reconsider the vote and reject it. You can also do that. Also, by the way, there are all sorts of things that can get in the way of doing that in order to do it. One, there needs to be a motion made to take up the motion. Someone needs to bring up a motion to reconsider. That can be blocked and filibustered. Then you have to make a motion to proceed to the motion to reconsider, and then there's all sorts of things that can get in the way. You might need a motion to proceed to the motion to reconsider. You might need a cloture on the motion to reconsider itself. And also, of course, the motion to reconsider needs to be made by someone who voted with the winning side. That would be the no side last time around. And while it's probably not hard to find somebody if this is an arranged stunt, it's just weird and confusing and looks dumb and basically will result in nothing, I assume. I don't really know why the vote would come out differently, but and in the face of a shutdown, I guess it's possible. Anyway, that's all out there as a possibility. I don't know. I really don't even know. I really didn't even bother to look to see what the Senate has planned for itself today because, it's pretty easy to see what's coming. They're interested in the shutdown. It occurred to me, over the last couple of days that it's certainly the White House position that they want a shutdown. And I think there's a couple reasons behind it. First of all, as I mentioned, or as Greg mentioned yesterday, Republicans are convinced once again that they can blame Democrats for the shutdown. That's, we have commentary on that.
That is not how this works!
Right. Well, that's one of the problems. Now, you don't have to get that excited about it, but basically that's true. I mean, as it's not a great way of, not very reassuring if you're placing a bet that that's just not how it works. But it's certainly the case that it's very difficult for the majority party holding a trifecta. And I guess if you count the courts, and you should, is there such a thing as a quadfecta, perfecta? I don't know what they call it. Anyway, but if you're holding the trifecta, if you control the House and the Senate, and your party is in control at the White House, well, it's no party in control at the White House per se, but you get the idea. It's very hard to blame the minority for not passing things in a majority rules situation. But they're going to try and do it anyway. Plus, the grand tradition of government shutdowns, and in the last couple decades have established that is, in fact, a grand tradition. For whatever reason, Democrats in control, Republicans in control. Republicans just catch the blame for shutdowns almost always. I can't think of an example where there was a public consensus that it was Democrats responsible for a shutdown, and it mattered. And that's another thing to point out. Though we hear about it all the time, and who's going to get blamed for a shutdown, and attempts by Republicans to blame Democrats for shutdown, blame is not something that's very frequently assigned by normal people for a shutdown. Mostly, it's funny, it's the one aspect of government shutdowns that arguably Republicans could be said to understand, is that most people don't really pay much attention to government shutdowns. Now, part of that is because they're usually partial government shutdowns, both because mandatory spending is unaffected by the expiration of the fiscal year. You don't have to make annual appropriations from year to year to keep mandatory type spending going. It's the discretionary spending that's affected by this. And while it's certainly true that I think Republicans are largely wrong when they say no one will be upset about a government shutdown because the government is a stupid thing anyway, and everybody hates it, and everybody wishes it was gone. And so we'll prove our point. This is where this whole thing began. I think in the 1995 shutdown, one of the most infamous in our last couple decades history of flirting with these things, the one where newly installed Republican Speaker Newt Gingrich, first of all, insisted that everybody would blame Democrats for it, even though he had just won a majority. And two, that it would be perceived as a positive thing, that the American public would say, good, I'm glad the federal government has shut down. And why would anybody bother to say it? I mean, even if you just don't like the way the government operates, or you think it's wasteful, it's a totally different thing to say, well, I'm glad it's gone. I hope it never comes back. That's a very Republican, and I mean a really, like, you have to be a Republican elected official to believe that sort of thing. And that's who did believe it. It was their view, of course, that the government had grown so bloated over the previous 40 or so years of Democratic control of the House of Representatives. That was their big pitch when they won back control in the 1994 elections, the Republican Revolution. They were going to show everybody that life, this was an interesting theory, life would go on as normal, and most people would not be adversely affected in any major way by a government shutdown, and that they would take that to mean that Republicans had been right the whole time, that the government is basically an exercise in waste. But it didn't go that way, because the government does do things. And while it was true that it didn't mean the sun didn't rise or the wind didn't blow, which is a major problem for renewable energy, apparently, in Donald Trump's mind. But if those things didn't happen, then people would say, hey, this is not so bad. But instead it was, hey, I went to the national parks for my vacation with my kids and it was closed. Or I went to the federal courthouse to try to file some paperwork and it was closed. Or, any number of these things. I went to try and fix my student loan problem and the office was closed. My agriculture field office locally was closed, and I don't know, I'm having an agricultural emergency. These things do happen. Right. So everybody began to realize, actually, it's nothing major. It's not that I can't breathe. It's not that I can't find food. It's not that there's no light or there's not enough flavors of ice cream or bagels on the shelves. This is just many, many minor inconveniences. And, of course, money stopped moving, too. It wasn't Social Security checks, but people started to miss out on payments that they were supposed to be getting that were helping them make it from day to day, and noticed, hey, we're not getting those things. And since then, it's just always been, oh, no, here comes another government shutdown. And once again, it's being precipitated by Republicans who keep insisting that nobody needs anything from anybody, and that the whole country will view them as heroes for throwing a wrench in the works. And it's just never happened that way. It might be unfair. I don't think so. I mean, what it comes down to, as we discussed yesterday with Greg, was essentially Republicans don't believe in operating the government. Period. They can't govern, and they don't want to, and they think most people would prefer that they didn't. And most people would prefer that they didn't govern. That's true. But they think that most people wish that there was nobody governing. Or in the absence of that, everybody wishes that everybody would listen to old white guys yelling about how it used to be in the old days. And it's not true. Whereas Democrats, generally speaking, you can disagree with them, disagree with their approaches, disagree with the amount of money that they spend, but they generally want to see things done by the government, and things generally are done by the government for all the complaining that happens. And so it's one of those natural things, I think, that falls out of it. Just people can't be convinced that by the party that keeps saying they don't want government, that the people who do want government are the ones preventing government from happening. It just doesn't work like that. And I guess it's sometimes it's unfair, I guess, but I haven't seen it yet. But it's the flip side of, well, despite the fact that Republicans run up the deficit and the debt all the time, despite the fact that they're particularly bad at running the economy, people just think of them that way. Well, they're for low taxes and strong economies. Well, they're not. But people do come away with that impression. And similarly, they come away with the impression that Democrats don't want to close the government and Republicans do. And it's probably because they keep trying, Republicans, to close the government and force Democrats who want to keep it open to make concessions to them in order to keep it open. So, and even the thing that drives rank and file Democratic Party supporters crazy, caving to Republican demands, or, we can only operate these programs, but not those programs, but something's better than nothing, take it or leave it, and they take it. I know, and that makes everybody mad, but it also leaves the public with the impression that these guys will do pretty much anything to make sure that the government stays open, to avoid a shutdown. Even when they say, that's it, we've had it, we draw our line in the sand. If you guys want to close down the government for your stupid demands, in the end, go ahead, we've done everything we can do. People have watched Democrats for decades do everything they can do, and it sticks. Anyway, I don't know. That's what I found to be the case with the shutdown rules. By the way, with the possibility of reconsidering the vote. Let me take a look at this quickly, because I happen to see that Ringwis and a few other procedure enthusiasts were talking about this possibility just yesterday. Ringwis saying, by the way, I don't know what it was. What the intro to this was. By the way, they have only one shot at this because, one, this is the reconsideration idea. The votes would be on passage, not cloture. And 2, if the Senate rejects the House bill again, the only way to get it back will be unanimous consent. There's the answer from Rule 13 on reconsideration of votes. If upon reconsideration the Senate shall affirm its first decision, that is to say, reject it again, no further motion to reconsider shall be in order unless by unanimous consent. Which, again, no great revelation. Unanimous consent fixes everything. Burgess Everett here mentioning, and Burgess is Congressional Bureau Chief at Semaphore now, formerly with Politico. And Burgess notes that Senate Majority Whip John Barrasso dismissing throwing Democrats a lifeline with a shorter CR. That was, I guess, the alternative that they were talking about. Just, take a short-term one. I guess that's supposed to be maybe less painful for Democrats to go along with. But he's saying he's not going to do that. And there's good reason not to go along with that. If you send back a shorter one, the House has to accept it in order for it to work. So instead, he says the House bill is going to be on the table, and that's what we're going to have a vote on. They're going to have to decide, says Barrasso, whether they're going to vote for what's on the floor or not. Okay, and Ringwist, by the way, also then saying a reminder of the procedural position. The Senate could pass either of the 2 bills that they voted on 2 weeks ago. No debate, just 3 votes. A motion to proceed to the motion to reconsider, the motion to reconsider, and then passage. Note that there is an order fixing a 60-vote threshold for passage of the 2 bills. I guess that's maybe what they're talking about. I was thinking that maybe a motion to proceed. I wonder if a motion to proceed to a motion to reconsider, and whether a motion to reconsider is debatable or not. And if it's not debatable, then it's not filibusterable. But if there's a standing order of the Senate, from whatever the origin may be, fixing a 60-vote threshold for passage, that is, of course, what we like to call the silent filibuster. There's the silent, well, some people refer to the silent filibuster as the fact that you can filibuster a bill without continuously talking on the floor. But my version of the silent filibuster is you agree ahead of time that it will require 60 votes to pass something, or sometimes known as the painless filibuster. But likewise, they both have dual uses, or I may use them for different things. But basically, if you say the vote itself, which normally would require just a majority to pass, if it requires by order, by agreement, 60 votes, then you just build the filibuster right into the vote count and avoid all the problems of wasting time or having to gather cloture votes, and you just sort of build in that 60 vote barrier into one single vote. Anyway, that's where we stand. I don't think they've had that vote yet. Ringwist was talking about this when? Yesterday afternoon. So by that point, I guess they hadn't yet voted. I can't imagine them staying in late to vote on something that was going to fail. I figure they'll be doing that today. And so much the better in terms of timing your stunt, I suppose, if you're going to do it on the 30th. So, okay, other items in the news. There's much happening, I think right now going on, unless it's over already, because he doesn't have that much to say ultimately. The big Pete Hegseth speech to the brass was going on this morning. The military does things early in the morning. So I noticed at about 8:30 there were clips already circulating, Aaron Rupar having parsed them to demonstrate that the whole thing was pretty much a waste of time. Flew in all the generals from around the world. Remember yesterday we found out that Trump thought that meant that Hegseth was addressing foreign generals. So maybe now, who knows? I haven't checked up on it in the last hour or so. Trump decided he wanted to go too. I can't imagine him getting up early to do it. So he's probably taking the speaking slot following Hegseth. But the results are in on the Hegseth speech. It ended up being a big, dumb motivational speech in which he complained that the troops and some of the generals are too fat. Now, honestly, that's really what it came down to. He also, by the way, warned 3-star generals and admirals and up that pacifism was naive and dangerous, and I believe the line he was using was the only people who deserve peace are those who are willing to fight to defend it. So, in other words, there's no such thing as peace. You don't deserve peace unless you'll fight. And if you're fighting, you're not having peace. But you could be fighting for peace, but you're still fighting. And so, all right, whatever. I guess that's the war fighter mentality. War is peace. Great. Anyway, the point really is I don't know a whole lot about the mindset of the 3-star general and up, but I'm guessing I'm going to estimate about 0 pacifists among the group he was addressing. So, I mean, I guess it was supposed to rally them to his side. You're all in support of this position. Pacivism. The other schism. Fascist pacivism. Yeah. Pacifism is dangerous and naive, and you got to be ready to fight to defend freedom. Okay. But I noticed that there was no applause, and that they were just annoyed to be there. And of course, flying them in at the expense of probably several $1 million to tell them pacifism is not my preferred ideology, and you're fat. Well, maybe it just wasn't worth doing. So maybe there'll be some spectacular blockbuster offered at the end, but I haven't seen it yet. But more and more, as the speech goes on, the little bits and pieces that are emerging from it, certainly this thing could have been a TED Talk and distributed on YouTube. There was really no reason to bring people there. And the guy Hegseth just doesn't recognize his limitations, and they must really be steaming sitting there listening to him. All right. So that's the current news. It looks like he's still going, which means Trump is not scheduled yet, and who knows when that'll turn up. All right. In the ugly American category, I guess we could add this story. This is a minor detail in the grand scheme of things, but the Australian Broadcasting Company are back in the news. Well, they're in the news business, but they're back in my view of the news here, telling us that Kash Patel, who should be here trying to solve the latest mass shootings, is in New Zealand, or at least was very recently. Why? To open an FBI field office in Wellington. Why? That's a great question. They address it at the end of the article. It is ostensibly to be working with allies around the world as it says, to collaborate on child exploitation and drug smuggling crimes. Not that they were going to collaborate on one another and commit those crimes. You understand this is the law enforcement community we're talking about. But I do have to point out that that's less clear than ever before because of what was up at the top of the article, the headline. Kash Patel gave New Zealand officials 3D printed guns that are, as it happens, illegal to possess under local laws. And what a great ugly American type visit. Not only bringing guns, but going to, as the United States' top law enforcement official, going to New Zealand, which has famously got some pretty tough restrictions on gun ownership, and bringing guns is weird, but super American. But of all the guns you could be bringing, why not a red, white, and blue AR-15 with Trump's face on the stock? We don't know why he opted not to do that. 3D printed guns, which are problematic here. They're definitely going to be problematic in New Zealand, and why bring them at all? But apparently they were part of some sort of funky display. I guess he thought it would be nice to give them a gift, and it would be nice to give them a gift when he visited to open this office. It's, by the way, in terms of office opening things, is extraordinarily dumb looking. He's cutting a ribbon in this photo, but like, I don't know, maybe the office is inside of an office building, so there's no outdoor thing. Or no, he doesn't cut the ribbon at the front door entrance. So what they've done is, what's in the photo is they've set up a table with the big seal on display that says the Legal Attaché Office, Wellington, New Zealand, and it doesn't even say FBI or anything. And then they took two like stanchions that they would use to, rope an area off, and put a ribbon between the two stanchions about, I would say, 4 feet, 5 feet apart. perhaps, and then stretched a piece of ribbon there, and now he's cutting that ribbon. The ribbon doesn't block anything. It's 5 feet wide. You can go around it to either side. Anyway, that's the stupid thing that they spent. I don't know how much they spent to fly him there. It doesn't matter. But anyway, he brings plastic guns with them. And apparently, very difficult to get a pistol license. It's an additional licensing procedure on top of any other type of gun ownership in New Zealand. And he presented the top law enforcement officials in New Zealand with a challenge coin display rack that had incorporated into it plastic 3D printed guns. It just doesn't make any particular sense. And it was an awfully dumb thing to do. I don't know. It seemed dumb for the top law enforcement official to also, by the way, say, I'm coming to your country and breaking your laws immediately, which, by the way, ordinarily would get deported in the United States. Remember, we hate that so much. But to troll New Zealand, I guess he decided to go ahead and do that. I don't know. Not a super important story in the grand scheme of things, but just another reminder that Kash Patel is a child in a grown-up's job, and we ought to be embarrassed by his performance and should seek to get rid of him ASAP. All right. Well, we've already talked our way all the way up to the first break, which is difficult to believe considering what the news has been and I don't know how much time was spent on covering the fact that very, very, very stupid and foolish and wasteful things are happening. And there are so many other things to cover. Luckily, there are 3 segments left. And, of course, I have to start thinking about what we're going to be doing for Thursday. So maybe some of the longer reads that we can't get to because we babble on about, oh, no, Pete Hegseth is mad that there are fat troops. Have another drink. It's really rather remarkable that he's spending their time on this. Maybe by the middle of the show, we'll start to see stupid comments from President Trump in front of the generals. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I got a couple of other things to share with you. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Here's a new entry in the capitulation files covered. I don't know why I chose this one, but USA Today, covered by USA Today. They don't get a chance all that often to get into the lineup. YouTube agrees to pay Trump $24.5 million to settle account suspension lawsuit. I think, by all accounts, another one of those lawsuits that was eminently winnable by the company, but strategic decision made. It would be better for us to cut off a limb and offer it up to Trump. For YouTube / this is what Google owned YouTube to find $24.5 million to hand over to Trump is just not a problem for them. And it may, and I don't think they would have spent that much on litigation. And of course, they could have then sought attorney's fees. But anyway, they decided it was strategically better for their businesses to jump out of the way than to fight the lawsuit. The idea being you could win, but you would make Trump mad doing it, and he would spend the entirety of the time and during the trial and then afterwards, he would just be seeking to find retribution all the rest of the time. So a company that size is going to have a lot of regulatory issues in front of the federal government. He would be putting pressure on each of the regulatory agencies to put the screws to them. He'd be canceling government contracts where he could, just making a nightmare for them. So they decided to get out of the way. YouTube, the subheader says, will pay $24.5 million to settle a lawsuit that Trump brought against the platform after his account was suspended after January 6th. Or as they say, after January 6th riots, which is quite true. And we should say the word. Terry Collins is the writer on this piece. So this was a personal suit. But of course, the reason they're capitulating, this should be restated every time. The reason YouTube is giving in is that Trump planned to use the power of the federal government to make YouTube and Google sorry that they didn't capitulate if they chose not to, because of this personal suit that he had brought forward. I was personally offended by what you did. I'm now going to use the government to exact retribution against you. That is really illegal and unconstitutional on its face, but, golly, it turns out that he can attempt to do it right in front of everybody. And if we're not willing to hold him to account for it, then, here's $25 million, I guess. YouTube agreed to pay $24.5 million to settle a lawsuit that President Donald Trump brought against the Alphabet-owned online video platform, in case you didn't know what YouTube was, over the suspension of his account following the deadly January 6th riots in 2021. YouTube suspended Trump's official channel on January 12th, 6 days. It took him a week to figure out that January 6th wasn't a good thing. Which, in hindsight, now that there's been a 5-year campaign of pretending that it was patriotism, I guess makes more sense. But at the time, it certainly didn't. 6 days, though, after the riots, and they suspended him from uploading new content at the time, citing the potential for violence, which, of course, was very real and true. The settlement was filed in federal court in Oakland, California on September 29th. That was just yesterday. In the weeks after the riots, when a mob of the former president's supporters attempted to disrupt Congress's certification of the 2020 presidential election of Joe Biden and kill the vice president, by the way, Trump was banned from a series of social media and video platforms, including YouTube, X, formerly known as Twitter, and Facebook. An estimated 10,000 people broke through police barriers to enter the Capitol grounds on January 6th. Of those, an estimated 2,000 entered the Capitol building, authorities said. The riot led to 4 deaths, including a demonstrator who was shot as she tried to reach fleeing lawmakers. A Capitol police officer later died from suffering strokes, and 4 other officers have taken their own lives since. More than 150 officers were injured, many permanently. Trump filed lawsuits against Twitter, Facebook owner Meta, and Alphabet's Google, along with their chief executives, personally. In July of 2021, Trump alleged that the platforms unlawfully silenced conservative viewpoints. So he was suing on behalf of conservatism in general, you see. Earlier this year, Meta, the owner of Facebook and Instagram, settled for $25 million, while X settled for about $10 million. So Elon Musk's gang got a break. $25 million from Meta. They'll get about $25 million from YouTube / Google, but only half that required from Elon Musk's X. In March of 2023, YouTube announced that Trump's channel was no longer restricted and that Trump could upload new content. Under the terms of the settlement with YouTube, 22 million of the 24.5 will be paid on Trump's behalf to the Trust for the National Mall. Why is that interesting? You remember it from just yesterday, don't you? It's a nonprofit organization. That's not the reason you're interested. It is dedicated to what? The Trust for the National Mall. It's dedicated to, of course, upkeep of the beautiful National Mall that we can all enjoy, right? Oh, well, maybe in the past. It's now been repurposed so that it is dedicated to the construction of a $200 million ballroom that Trump is, he says, building at the White House. So 10% right there of the alleged cost, although I'm pretty sure they'll overrun their costs, of the $200 million comes from YouTube in their please leave us alone, don't bother us anymore settlement. The remaining $2.5 million of the settlement, by the way, will go to other plaintiffs in the case, including the American Conservative Union, who no doubt was instrumental in powering through to the end of this fabulous vindication of their rights. There you go. So $22 million contribution to this abomination of a ballroom that we're going to have to deal with forever. I know a lot of people are already thinking, well, the next Democratic president should tear it down. And I mean, it might be symbolic. It might be of interest to do so. Although I would guess that basically, status quo type people, why go through the trouble and expense of tearing this thing down that's just been built and, to underline the government waste that went into constructing this thing, even if it was financed by stupid lawsuits. I mean, it was financed by stupid lawsuits that were powered by leveraging the power of the federal government. So you can't even say it's not necessarily taxpayer funded. But anyway, I do think they might have to do something about it too. It's interesting. Trump keeps emphasizing, well, this will be paid for privately, by private donations, and by myself. And I'm not certain that he'd actually put out any money for it if he didn't have to. If he could raise all the money this way, steal all the money this way, take all the money, and in the Fifth Amendment sense of taking. To say it's paid for by private donations when it's paid for by lawsuit settlements in which Trump personally leverages the power of the government to pry money away from people who probably should have paid it in taxes in the first place. I guess there's that. And then waste it on the ballroom. But he keeps emphasizing that's going to be privately paid for and privately constructed. By the way, I think this raises a problem. It's purely speculation, but I'm just thinking, if the federal government were taking this on as a public project, there would presumably be some oversight mechanism. Not that they couldn't defeat the oversight mechanism or cheat the oversight mechanism or ignore the oversight mechanism to do these things, but there would be those mechanisms. But since it's supposedly, quote unquote, a private construction, and the way Trump operates, I assume he's going to try and assume personal control for certain aspects of the construction. And I was just thinking, since he's built a replica of, say, the Pervalago patio in the Rose Garden, he's going to want to Pervalago this ballroom, not just in the decorations and the, supposedly 24 karat gold, yada, yada. Another issue. But what about his penchant for surveillance devices, cameras and recording equipment? This, to me, handing over this monstrosity of a ballroom to the federal government and to the next president as part of the White House complex poses every bit of danger that we saw in the idea of handing over the Qatari luxury jet for use as Air Force One, that it would have to be stripped down to the wiring to make sure that there were no surveillance devices hidden in the wiring for security purposes. I mean, I would imagine there's probably more toilet cams going to be installed in this $200 million ballroom than at the Moscow Hilton. So I'd be very wary of holding on to this building just for security reasons. God only knows what's being built into this thing. And if it's privately constructed under his supervision, who knows what's going to be planted in there. It's a bad idea to keep it. It's just bad security thinking. But Republicans will no doubt go crazy. Fox News will go wild the day they decide to demolish this thing. It's a beautiful monument to America. How dare you? Anyway, so what about Trump's other legal settlements? What does USA Today have to say about that? Besides the big tech companies, many major media outlets, as you know, have settled lawsuits with Trump in the past year. In July, Trump settled a federal lawsuit with CBS's parent company, Paramount Global, $16 million in that deal after taking exception to a 60 Minutes interview of Kamala Harris that aired on their network in October, weeks before the general election. Again, eminently winnable, but they said, F it, let's give you a bunch of money. Trump claimed CBS deceptively edited an interview to tip the scales in favor of the Democratic Party in the election. CBS aired two versions of the interview with then Vice President Harris, in which she appeared to give different answers to the same question about the Israel-Hamas war, which is, complicated. Maybe there are two answers. I don't know. I didn't see it. The case went to mediation in April after Paramount argued that the lawsuit was, quote, completely without merit. Yeah, and asked the judge to dismiss the case before settling. Paramount said the settlement money would be allocated to Trump's future presidential library and not paid to Trump directly or indirectly. But I wonder if they could transfer it to the Trust for the National Mall once it's in the library fund. I don't know, but speculation would be, failure to speculate would be irresponsible. But there you have it. Lawsuit's completely without merit, but here's $16 million anyway. The settlement does not include a statement of apology or regret. Gee whiz, what a win. And then, of course, there was, in December of 2024, ABC parent owner of the Walt Disney Company. Everybody knows about that relationship now, ABC and Disney. Settled with Trump for $15 million over a March 2024 federal lawsuit. Trump accused ABC and news anchor George Stephanopoulos of defamation during an interview with Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who has spoken publicly about being raped as a teenager. What did that have to do with anything? I don't remember. During the interview, Stephanopoulos inaccurately said Trump was found liable for rape, and asked Mace how she could endorse the candidate. Last year, Trump was found liable for sexually assaulting and defaming writer E. Jean Carroll and was ordered to pay her $5 million. In January, Trump was found liable for an additional defamation claim and ordered to pay Carroll $83.3 million. Neither verdict, they have to point out, involved a finding of rape as defined under New York law, according to their telling of it. On September 8th, the Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit in Manhattan declined to dismiss Trump's appeal to not pay the $83 million. Declined to dismiss Trump's appeal. Okay, which means Trump remains responsible for nearly $90 million in total damages against Carroll. So, anyway, there's a lot of money moving around backwards and forwards, and all of it leveraged by Trump's grip on the federal government, and you probably shouldn't lose sight of that if you're keeping score at home. All right. Golly, there's a lot more to get to. It's difficult to know which direction to go in here on some of these things. How about this one? Why not? Here, the master deal maker, the best deal maker ever, has made another great deal on prescription drug prices. What's the deal? How did it work? Politico has this fantastic news for all of us. David Lim has got the story. This reported, just yesterday. The Trump administration's there's a pop-up in my way, and it's not the generated by the site. It's all right, never mind. The Trump administration's favored tactic to force companies to act. What is it? President Donald Trump is relying on drug makers, in this case, to lower U.S. prices on their own, but he might get less than he bargained for. They're being very cagey about it in the headline and subheader. President Donald Trump sent letters to 17 of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies at the end of July. I don't think we discussed it, but he demanded that they voluntarily lower U.S. prices for some of their drugs to match what they charge in affluent foreign nations. If you refuse to step up, we will deploy every tool in our arsenal to protect American families from continued abusive drug pricing practices, he wrote, requesting a response by September 29th. That was, of course, yesterday, and I guess he got his response. And he is adept at deploying every tool in the arsenal to do things. Whether it's really protecting the American public, I don't know, but that's what his claim. The time has come for companies to draw up to the table. Eli Lilly appears to have publicly responded, pledging to do what he asked to make sure that Americans pay the same prices as Europeans and others overseas pay for their drugs. So huge victory, everybody. Your drug prices are going to be cut to match the prices they charge in Europe. And remember, he keeps telling the story. I have a friend. He's a very fat guy, and I hate him because he's disgusting, and fat is disgusting. And not mine, of course, just his. But he takes Ozempic. I don't think it's working, but he takes it, and he says to me, guess what? I bought it in Europe. I pay here $20 bazillion for one dose, but I went to Europe, $80. $80 I got to pay. Isn't that fantastic? And I said, I don't care. You're a fat idiot, and I hate your guts. But that's the story he tells. So terrific. All the drugs will be $80 or whatever now. Nope. Guess what? There was somebody must have read the proposition and said, ho, the president's dumb. Watch this. Eli Lilly appears to have publicly responded, pledging to raise prices in Europe to rather than lower what they charge in the U.S. And Bristol Myers Squibb said it plans to charge the same list price for its new schizophrenia treatment in the United Kingdom as in the U.S. And congratulations. I think it's very thematic, though, that there should not be a split pricing personality for the new schizophrenia treatment. That is, I think, just a good approach in general. So there you go. Basically, Trump said, I'm going to get you. If you don't, you should charge the same here as you charge in Europe. Well, now we do. They're raising their prices in Europe. What happens next, whether the drug makers make meaningful voluntary changes or the Trump administration follows through with the regulatory stick, will test the effectiveness of a tactic Trump has been using to force businesses to act. This isn't the last word, of course. He can't say, well, you can't. Can you imagine Trump saying, you got me on a technicality. I'm going to give up now. Maybe if the drug company CEOs join Pervalago and buy a bunch of Trump coin or pay for the ballroom, I could see it sticking. But, will he say that's exactly what I don't know. As long as you meet the letter of my letter, if not the law, I'll be fine with it. So he may yet threaten them and may yet get them to do something they didn't want to do, including paying for the ballroom, I suppose. The Trump administration has been relying heavily on drug makers, food producers, and insurers to take steps on their own that officials say will improve public health and lower costs. Companies, in return, have made a flurry of public commitments to stave off government regulatory action, ranging from replacing petroleum-based synthetic dyes in certain foods to pledging to reduce medical services subject to prior authorizations, offering direct-to-consumer pricing for popular medicines, etc. But former government officials and public health experts warn that it will be difficult to achieve these goals and others without mandatory regulations. Profit-seeking companies, they warn, will make commitments that appear to acquiesce without harming their bottom lines. Former top Food and Drug Administration tobacco regulator Mitch Zeller acknowledged securing voluntary industry commitments is a faster and less costly process, but he argued an over-reliance on dialogue risks sidelining the core functions of public health agencies. FDA's job, when the evidence is there, is to create regulatory policy that has the force of law, said Zeller, who headed the Center for Tobacco Products from 2013 to 2022. I wish the consideration of enforceable regulatory policy was a higher priority for this administration because that's why we have an FDA. But of course, the FDA doesn't pay for ballrooms, so this is a much better solution for Trump. While the Trump administration, led by a president who often employs the force of his personality, appears to rely on voluntary corporate actions more than its predecessors, the tactic is not new. Democratic administrations have also leaned on private industries to make voluntary commitments in the past. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Biden administration asked social media companies to take down, this is an interesting parallel, to take down alleged misinformation about COVID-19. And during the Obama administration, officials pressed food manufacturers to make voluntary changes to package front labels to include information of fat content as well as sodium and calorie levels. That campaign, spearheaded by then First Lady Michelle Obama, aimed to combat childhood obesity levels. And remember, we're trying to make America healthy again, and we're mad about fat troops. But when Michelle Obama does that, that's communism. There you go. Ultimately, the FDA moved forward with a proposed regulation years later to require front-of-package nutrition labels in January, shortly before Joe Biden left office, which, of course, probably was then immediately reversed by Trump. As the clock ticks down, there are signs that the Trump administration may have regulatory efforts ready to deploy if drug makers don't meet Trump's demands. On Thursday, the White House began reviewing a proposed regulation from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services that could potentially force drug makers to offer their drugs at, quote, global benchmark prices. While the details of the model are not yet public, Trump tried to pursue a similar regulation during his first term that sought to deploy a most favored nation regulation for a subset of high-cost Medicare Part B drugs. Getting weedy here. The previous effort was quickly struck down in courts on procedural grounds, but the Trump administration appears to be readying a second attempt using a more deliberative process. That is to say, we'll kill you, judges, if you don't get out of the way this time. I don't think they have that many procedural issues this time around. The administration is first pressuring industry to take discretionary steps. They are described herein, but I think we can probably hop out of this article, which is actually quite lengthy and detailed, and you could spend your time well perusing the rest of it, but I think you get the gist, right? So, interesting twist that the pharmaceutical companies are trying first, and in combination with the settlements we keep reading about, we'll see whether they get the last laugh in this exchange. My thinking is that they will not, and they will end up, I don't know whether they'll end up lowering prices, but they'll end up making involuntary contributions to the construction of this ballroom, I think. In international news, why not? We'll shift and we'll go back and forth in between international and domestic, and hopefully cram this one in before the top of the hour break. The Kyiv Independent, at the time that they reported it, I guess, well, oh no, they reported on September 28th. Okay, I was wondering whether they reported this late yesterday and datelined it September 30th because it was the 30th then. Well, it was still the 29th here, but no. What is the Russian shadow fleet of weirdo renegade tankers up to now, in addition to dragging their anchor across the floor of the Baltic Sea and cutting communications cables and endangering fuel lines? Russia is now using its shadow fleet of tankers to, if you were wondering where all these things were coming from, launch drones toward European cities, Zelensky says. So as we were reading the other day about the drones menacing airports in Denmark and Estonia and other places, and of course drone incursions into Poland. If you're wondering where they were coming from, I guess part of the answer is those weird shadow fleet tankers out there. It's not their Navy doing it. It's a bunch of tankers that, for look for all intents and purposes like commercial vessels, but are, I guess, in fact, controlled by, as everything is, by the Russian oligarchy. So, what's the news? Who's reporting it? Get this thing out of the way. Too many pop-ups. Never mind. Dmitro Basmat. By the way, I'm being plagued not by advertising pop-ups, but by navigational pop-ups, both from the site and from my own, desktop here. That pop up if you scroll over the wrong thing, you're doomed. Russia's so-called shadow fleet of oil tankers are being used to launch and control Russian drones over European cities, President Vladimir Zelensky said on September 28th, citing intelligence reports. The comments come amid increased tension between Russia and NATO countries over airspace violations. Have you heard? Yeah. Over the past month, Russian drones have violated Polish, Romanian, and possibly Dutch, we missed that one, Finnish, we should have guessed that, but we did miss it, and Danish airspace. On September 19th, Estonia accused Russia of violating its airspace with 3 MiG-31 fighter jets, which remained in Estonian airspace for 12 minutes, triggering NATO's Article 4, while on September 26th, Hungarian fighter jets intercepted 5 Russian aircrafts over the Baltic Sea. So, everything. What do we got? Poland, Romania, the Netherlands, Finland, Denmark, Estonia, Hungary, and then, of course, the regular incursions over the Alaskan airspace, although not over Alaskan land, but out to sea. So what are we, 7, 8 different countries we're working on here? Zelensky made the comments during his evening address calling for additional sanctions to be implemented on Russia's shadow fleet amid the drone threats. It is especially important that the sanctions hit Russia's energy trade and the entire infrastructure of the Russian tanker fleet painfully, Zelensky said. This is further evidence that the Baltic Sea and other seas should be closed to Russian tankers, at least for the shadow fleet. Yeah, well, that's a drastic step, and that's a calculated part, I guess, of the shadow fleet strategy. Well, what are you going to do? Stop all commercial vehicles to see if they're Russian? I mean, they could have them reflagged, whatever. They could be from other countries but under Russian control, or, it's just problematic enough to say you're going to stop Russian commercial tanker ships. Remember how many of you area countries get your fossil fuel supplies from Russia, but of course, all the more reason to impose sanctions to prevent that from happening. Anyway, that's the thinking. Russia's shadow fleet has been increasingly targeted by Western sanctions as Ukraine's international partners seek to limit Russian oil revenues, which help fund Moscow's war machine. The shadow fleet includes hundreds of older, often uninsured or poorly maintained tankers. These typically operate under the flags of other countries and have little transparency, making it difficult for regulators to enforce sanctions. Amid the European Union's anticipated 19th sanctions package, U.S. officials have also considered new sanctions on Russia's shadow fleet should Russian President Vladimir Putin fail to agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine, despite an initial deadline for the sanctions being set for August 8th. U.S. President Donald Trump has yet to implement additional sanctions on Russia. What a surprise. Following Zelensky's meeting with Trump in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly earlier this week, Ukrainian president had said in his evening address that Kyiv counts on strong steps from the United States of America. Well, keep counting, I guess. We'll see whether we live up to that or not. But anyway, an interesting angle to the continuing story of airspace violations throughout Europe and even in Alaska by the Russians. And, all part and parcel of Trump's, I guess, increasing awareness that actually Putin kind of sucks. Hey, I hope he stays on this bench for a while and doesn't just do a 180 on this too. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, well, time to change directions once again, and why not double back and head back to other angles on stories discussed earlier today. I'm trying to find where that segue story was. There are several things to get back to, but since we were talking about Hegseth and the military and the shutdown, there are a couple of things that I thought I might circle back to. One, in, what am I reading here? Army.mil, the U.S. Army's very own web domain, reporting here. What am I looking at? I mean, it doesn't say what the publication is. I mean, it's newspaper-style publication, but it is at home here on Army.mil. Oh, DOD News. All right, there we go. It's in the byline. David Vergan of DOD News. This is, slightly older story, about a month old. August 25th. Happy birthday to me at the time. I was so happy about my birthday that I missed this news that I guess must have recirculated on social media. And when I say social media, I mean specifically Blue Sky, and caught my eye. And I guess because, Hegseth is going to be in the news making his dumb speech. I have this. Hegseth announces establishment of Mexican Border Defense Medal. They needed to come up with something that he could pin on troops and hand out to people and presumably make active duty military people who have been made miserable by work at the border happy. And I don't know whether that's really going to make them happy, or I think the implication of the recirculation of the story was that's not really going to make anybody very happy. I mean, it's not that people don't like getting medals and stuff, but, doesn't erase all the misery of this particular mission. All right. That's my guess of the implication. Whether that's really what people feel in the military, that I have no idea. Anyway, but effective immediately, but that was a month ago, so I assume it already happened. The Mexican Border Defense Medal is established to recognize service members deployed to the U.S. international border with Mexico for Defense Department support to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, said Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth in an August 13th memorandum. So we missed the story, but there you go. So if we made you miserable by being deployed to the border, we'll make it up to you by giving you this new medal that we had designed, and I get to give it to you. All right. Service members deployed in support of CBP previously were recognized with the Armed Forces Service Medal. They wanted to give them some medals for it. That's a thing they do in the military. Happens all the time. But now they have a special one to give you. And I don't know whether people who earlier got the Armed Forces Services Medal will also then be eligible for this new Mexican Border Defense Medal, but I don't know. I'd rather have the Armed Forces Service Medal. I think that's just more, that sounds like you've done something more important. And of course, the Mexican Border Defense idea, like you didn't really have to do anything. Wasn't really any defense going on. It's not like it was a combat operation. But anyway, to receive the new award, service members must have been permanently assigned, attached, or detailed to a unit that deployed to participate in a designated DoD military operation supporting CBP within the area of eligibility for 30 consecutive or non-consecutive days from January 20th to a future termination date to be determined, Hegseth said. It sounds like they're looking to give out a lot of these medals. And sometimes the way it is with things, they want to make sure everybody gets a participation trophy in a sense. So the eligibility is wide open for a lot of people to get a hold of one of these medals. And that's the way it should be. The area of eligibility, we mentioned this, right? This is the terminology they use. You have to have been assigned to a unit designated to do CBP support within the area of eligibility for 30 days. Doesn't matter how you do your 30 days, consecutive or non-consecutive. Yay. Anyway, where is the area of eligibility? Well, they must be thinking, if we had to put you on, in Brownsville, Texas, or on the border at Eagle Pass or whatever, where everybody was so miserable all those times, camping out in the scrubland within sight of, restaurants and civilization. It made everybody quite miserable, as I recall. We'll give you the medal, right? So, well, it's a little broader than that, so that we can give out plenty of medals. The area of eligibility is U.S. land within 100 nautical miles from the international border with Mexico within Texas, including the city of San Antonio, as well as New Mexico, Arizona, California, and the adjacent U.S. waters out to 24 nautical miles, he said. So if you've been in the area, but you've done 30 days in the area, you get yourself a medal. Service members and veterans previously awarded now we get the answer, the AFSM, and you remember what that was, right? The Air Armed Forces Services Medal. If you got that, you can apply for the new award in lieu of the AFSM previously awarded, the secretary said, adding, no one can be awarded both medals for the same period of qualifying service, but I guess what if you do two 30-day stints? That I don't know. Securing the southern border, protecting the territorial integrity of the U.S., and defending our homeland are Department of Defense priorities, said Anthony J. Tata, Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. We've mentioned that guy before. Tata underscored the timeliness and criticality of the award. How do you like that? Adding, the service members deployed to support this national security imperative deserve to be recognized for their bravery and contributions. They certainly deserve to be recognized for their contributions. What I guess in some cases it would be bravery. Like if you're miserable and you stick by the mission, it's a form of bravery. Certainly, I don't know. They like to throw around bravery a little bit here. It's not a combat medal, but medals are medals. I'm not doing any of these things. I didn't go anywhere. They are. So can't begrudge them a medal and say, we look forward to pinning the Mexican Border Defense Medal on them soon. The U.S. Army Institute of Heraldry. I mean, somebody has to design the medals. That's true, right? And it makes sense to have one, but it's one of those things that ordinarily, if a Democratic administration was establishing this office, Republicans would go crazy. A U.S. Army Institute of Heraldry, how dare you spend money on this? We're $4 trillion in debt, bazillion dollars, whatever the debt is these days. Anyway, they will expedite procurement of MBDMs made to DoD standards, and the Defense Logistics Agency will expedite the process for procuring and placing the MBDM in the supply system to ensure timely availability of the award for qualifying service members and veterans. What would you like to know about the medal? Anything? I'll tell you. Because according to the Institute of Heraldry, the MBDM, it's not easy to say by initials, is identical. You know where that's coming from? To the Mexican Border Service Medal. It's a throwback, right? This is the Mexican Border Defense Medal. It's identical to the Mexican Border Service Medal struck in 1918 for service in 1916 and 17 in the Mexican state of Chihuahua and on the U.S. side in the vicinity of the New Mexico and Texas borders with Mexico. So I guess you could say not our first rodeo, if you wanted to use a rodeo thing, because rodeo, Texas, right? Why not? The medals are bronze. On the front is a sheathed Roman sword hanging on a tablet, along with the inscription that reads, "For service on the Mexican border." The sword symbolizes war or military strength. Oh, yeah, really? And is sheathed to indicate service in the United States rather than in actual combat. Okay. On the reverse side is the coat of arms of the United States above a scroll and surrounded by a wreath ending at the center with crossed rifles in dexter, crossed sabers in sinister, and crossed cannons in base. There's your heraldry. The wreath represents achievement. The rifles, sabers, and cannons, what might they represent? Why, infantry, cavalry, and artillery, of course. The ribbon's field of green is symbolic of freedom. How so? Because, what did you think it was? Forests and trees? It's freedom. While the golden yellow color alludes to virtue. Well, that's very true for this presidency anyway. It's 24 karat gold. That's virtue. These colors represent civic virtue by serving the government in pursuit of freedom. Not for Mexicans, but, for everybody else, I guess. The order of precedence for the MBDM will be before the AFSM and after the Korea Defense Service Medal, in case you were wondering where to put it on your uniform. Whatever. Okay. It's interesting. It's just something to think about. And of course, a reminder that, yes, people are employed in the U.S. Army Office of Heraldry, and with good reason, too. Not everybody's positions have to be eliminated, Speaking of which, let me throw you an interesting curveball of a story. It hasn't been published anywhere, but it'll be of particular interest to those of us here, listeners to the Kagro in the Morning Show, and who have been, tracking all the changes, both the dodgy damage that's been done to the federal government, the impending shutdown, and the further damage that it will be doing there. We really need to discuss the legal aspects of that at some point. But first, the personal aspects of it. You may recall that our frequent contributor, Darwin, is a Navy veteran and currently, at least at the moment, involved in contracting for the federal government, which, because everybody's in danger, is posing a danger to himself as well. So it turns out that after the first round of dodgy-driven cuts, the folks working on his project that remained thought that they were safe. And I mean, here we're talking about some 30 plus people working on this project, on this contract, and it was pared down to 6. And thankfully our Darwin was among them, but it looks like the luck is about to run out. So, Darwin finds the work in danger, and therefore, his livelihood with it. So he just wrote to me the other day saying, by the way, I don't know if you have any connections in this area. You could find new work, find new sources of income, a lead, someone to talk to. And I don't think I do. I mean, I don't have military contractor type connections, but I don't know who's in the audience. He don't know who's in the audience. You know who's in the audience. Is this something where we could make a connection here? Are we gonna? It's not the love connection. It's the work connection. But what about that? You all know Darwin from his reporting. You know that very often he takes on those stories with a military bent as well. He is in the DMV area. Those of you, if you know, you know. But yeah, Northern Virginia based Navy veteran, Navy logistics specialist. So that's what we're talking about here. And we're talking about work at the mid-level or team lead level. Those of you who are in this sort of business know exactly what we're talking about. Project management. He is PMP certified. Strategic planning, operations management, or logistics. That's what we're looking for. Anybody? Got an idea? Got a lead? If you want, you can contact me. You can contact Darwin directly. And I'll tell you what, why don't we add a layer of, I don't want to add a layer of complication to it, but if you need to contact, or if you think you might have something, or know somebody who might, for Darwin here, contact me. You can use my email here, kagrox@gmail.com. Darwin does say you can contact him directly via email. And I'll tell you what, if he wants to insist on that kind of direct contact, I was wondering whether we should add this extra layer of security. Come through me and I'll pass it on, or I'll pass your email on to him, and then you can make that contact that way. Upon pending further review, we'll hold back on the email here, because it's a weird situation out there, and you don't want the wrong people getting wind of something and deciding we need to take retribution somehow on poor Darwin. But there you have it. Is that something? Have we got somebody in the audience? By the way, I'll tell you what, college boy number 1, who's been very, very helpful in editing the show on a daily basis and very adept at it, could use some direction and work as well. If you need to, let's say, a genius economist who's adept in econometrics, for instance, or somebody to edit your podcast, because along the way he's picked up some tremendous skills on that front as well. Just very adept at picking up software packages and applications in general, as these kids are today. But we'll focus first on Darwin to make sure things are if we can stand him back up and continue the stability, then you'll be able to hear from him again more frequently if this is not an issue or a concern. You get the idea? Okay. By the way, while we're on that sort of housekeeping agenda, I have another donation boost to announce. Somebody who went back and said, yeah, I can do a little bit more for the Kagro in the Morning Show via Patreon. RJS, whose account on Patreon does offer a longer name associated with the email, but it's chosen to be identified on the system as just as RJS. Thank you very much for back on the 17th of this month agreeing to boost your contribution. I also have news for you on that front. For those of you who have been sitting through our new Libsyn auto-generated commercials during the Libsyn podcast of the show, and saying, I'm willing to sit through it because it helps to support the show. As it turns out, it really does. So we're getting some idea of how much additional revenue that brings in for the show. And it looks like, let me jump back into my inbox here. Libsyn tells us that for the month of August, the commercials that ran have earned the Kagro in the Morning Show an additional $300. So that's pretty good. How foolish were we for foregoing this ad revenue for however long this had been available? But we finally gave in to the Libsyn idea. So that makes a difference too, where you download the show. As you know, if you are a person who hates having ads of any kind in it, well, then you're out of luck because we stick those into the podcast ourselves. But there are ads. Some of them are Darwin. Speaking to you on behalf of the show, and we owe you some updates. I know it weighs on my conscience every day, but I know I take comfort in the fact that you're probably fast forwarding through them. Maybe you're doing that with the ads on Libsyn as well. But if you are somebody who just can't stand to hear outside advertising, the opportunity is available to you if you download the show through Libsyn. If you're a subscriber, you can sign up and support the show that way. If you can't spare the cash or you want to make a greater contribution even than your subscription via Patreon, via PayPal, via whatever methodology it is you choose that we happen to accept, you can download the show through Libsyn. And every play through the show generates these ads that generates further revenue for us. So it can be on top of what you contribute or instead of what you contribute. And we appreciate your sitting through those ads and doing whatever clicking needs to be done in order to generate this additional revenue. So far, so good. And hopefully that number only goes up as we continue with the program. There's much needed to support the show, and we really appreciate your sitting through it, just like my rambling right now. I appreciate that as well. So let's see. There was another subject that I thought we might return to, and we'll see whether we can find them here. Yes. Media Matters with an important breakdown in the addition to the coverage of the continued deterioration of President Trump's brain, essentially. Media Matters' own Matt Gertz, everyone's favorite because it sounds like Matt Gaetz, and that's just funny, and it never won't be. But he's reporting on the January 6th false flag claim, a new and, well, it's not new, but well, this claim is new, but it's not particularly different. But a false flag claim that has made it into the president's mush brain and come out his mouth and of his social media posts. Just to keep up to date on what stupid thing he's talking about, Matt Gertz is taking on the task. The right-wing conspiracy theory that hundreds of plainclothes FBI agents who were deployed to respond to the riotous mob at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th had actually incited the crowd in a, quote, Fed-surrection, get it, spread through the right-wing conspiracy echo chamber over the weekend and reached President Donald Trump in just over 36 hours after its inception, if you're wondering how quickly the pipeline works. It's not entirely new, this idea that the feds have somehow incited this, but I guess this version of the conspiracy theory came with a specific number of agents. And we know the provenance of Trump's fever dream because the numbers match. That's where we get this 36-hour pipeline from. Elements of the right-wing media, led by former Fox News host Tucker Carlson, spent years concocting an alternate narrative of January 6th in which the rioters were heroes and violence was actually caused by federal agents, you see. And the resulting prosecutions of perpetrators constituted a brutal campaign of government repression. Following Trump's return to office, of course, his pardoning of the rioters and the firings of and demotions of prosecutors and FBI agents who handled their cases, this is effectively the position now of the United States federal government. Given those dynamics and the president's willingness to promote any lie, no matter how far-fetched, as long as it fits his biases, Given those dynamics, false claims supporting the narrative of January 6th as a, quote, inside job can spread with alarming speed. Late on September 25th, right-wing journalist John Solomon's Just the News outlet published a story with the headline, FBI bombshell, 274 agents sent to Capitol for J6, that's their preferred terminology for it. Many later complained they were political pawns. John Solomon, a poisonous rat of a fake journalist, who also, has been in the news for a long time for his schemes and now has not only this new outlet, Just the News, but apparently involved in behind-the-scenes effort to concoct an entire right-wing newsosphere network that was just written up and constitutes one of the several long reads I've been sort of holding in reserve. I don't think we can get to it today, but it might make good material for Thursday. So, fair warning on that one. John Solomon back in the news. Well, here's what he had to say. The FBI secretly deployed more than 250 plainclothes agents to the U.S. Capitol during the January 6th riot, an operation so disorganized it unleashed searing frustrations among many of the FBI's rank and file that the Bureau had lost its core competencies to wokeness and allowed its employees to become pawns in a political war, which they're definitely not right now, according to an after-action report kept from the public for more than 4 years. Or maybe that was imagined by us just recently. Solomon and Stephen Richards wrote in the article's first paragraph. What a blockbuster, huh? Solomon and Richards did not reveal until the story's 11th paragraph that the agents had been deployed after the violence started. Oops, my bad. The pair lifted up complaints from the FBI agents that in an emergency situation in which thousands of people had laid siege to the U.S. Capitol, assaulting scores of law enforcement officers and threatening the safety of the entirety of the U.S. Senate and U.S. House, as well as Vice President Mike Pence, who were assembled to count the Electoral College votes. Well, those agents had been hurriedly assigned riot control duties, even if they lacked training and gear for that purpose. That was their big complaint. Solomon and Just the News both shared the story on X using the text of the headline, and right-wing conspiracy theorists quickly responded by assuming that the report fit their assumption that January 6th was a false flag operation. Retired General Mike Flynn, the notorious spy, of course, who served briefly as Trump's national security advisor during his first term, before having to be jettisoned, said of this story, "The question this begs is, was there sedition or conspiracy committed on the part of the DOJ and FBI at the time? No, of course not, but, sure, let's ask. You don't just have 274 FBI agents or employees show up to execute this massive of a Fedsurrection. This required foreknowledge, parentheses, intent," he added, and here is the embedded text or tweet in which he does it. MAGA poster Bill Mitchell, oh boy, likewise claimed that the FBI agents had been, quote, infiltrators. Trump himself quickly adopted this misreading of the Just the News report. He posted to Truth Social midday, September 27th, that, quote, it was just revealed that the FBI had secretly placed, ellipses, 274 FBI agents into the crowd just prior to and during the January 6th hoax. He added that the reporting showed that FBI agents were at and in the January 6th protest, probably acting as agitators and insurrectionists, but certainly not as law enforcement officials, and demanded the identities of the FBI agents involved. Isn't that great? Trump's post brought a new wave of right-wing conspiracy mongering over the report, with various MAGA figures claiming that it showed there had been a Fedsurrection in which FBI agents acted as provocateurs. They were, of course, at the time. Anyway, FBI Director Kash Patel, who wasn't even in the country at the time, I guess, stepped in to try to tamp down the situation. Without admitting that Trump was wrong, he said in a statement, to Fox News Digital that, quote, agents were sent into a crowd Agents were sent into a crowd control mission, there we are, after the riot was declared by the Metro Police, something that goes against FBI standards, for which he blamed, quote, corrupt leadership. Faced with the same situation, presumably Patel would have allowed the January 6th insurrection to proceed rather than violating standards of sending FBI agents to quell it. By Sunday morning, the false claim about the FBI agents had been thoroughly baked into mainstream GOP discourse when CNN anchor Jake Tapper asked House Speaker Mike Johnson whether the rule of law applies to people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. Oh, we got to have the rule of law. Well, does that apply to them? Johnson replied, I'm glad you brought that up, citing, quote, new information over the last couple of days about how there were 274 FBI agents in the crowd on January 6th. Tapper quickly cut him off, saying that according to Patel, they were sent there to do crowd control because of everything that was going on. They weren't. It wasn't a false flag operation, as President Trump suggested. What did Mike Johnson respond? I'll tell you in about 2 minutes while I make it up.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were in the middle when we left. I didn't actually make anything up. I'll just read you what Matt Gertz has to say in his Media Matters reporting on the latest version of the conspiracy theory spread now by the supposed president of the United States that plainclothes FBI agents were planted in the crowd in January 6th, and they really aren't they really the ones responsible for all the violence after all? No, not even Kash Patel will go there. But anyway, Jake Tapper, I guess, confronted on over the weekend with having to interview House Speaker Mike Johnson because he's the House Speaker and he has a suit and tie, and you got to have him on every once in a while. He too spread this stupid rumor that 274 FBI agents were in the crowd on January 6th and that they were there for the purposes of inciting the violence. It wasn't really their responsibility that there had been violence on January 6th. But Tapper cuts him off and says, even Kash Patel says they were sent there after the fact. Once the violence started, and the FBI did in fact respond. Whether it was 274 agents, I don't know. Whether they were in plain clothes, I don't know. But were they there to seed the crowd with violent-minded insurrectionism? No. That was the goal of the gathering from the beginning. Who sold Civil War T-shirts, January 6th T-shirts? Was it the FBI? No? Okay. Then there's your answer. Tapper cuts him off and says, no, that's stupid. But Johnson, who was among the members of Congress evacuated to a secure location during the riots, replied, well, Jake, wait a minute. Hold on, Jake. How do you know that, right? There's lots of questions. He added, there's videos. And it's always been disputed what involvement some of those persons engaged in, what involvement they had. Did they spur on the crowd? Did they open the gates to allow them in? I don't know. There are questions, but they should be answered. Oh, my God. I'm just asking questions, right? Sure. Johnson went on to say that the House subcommittee newly established to reinvestigate the attack would get to the bottom of the situation, I'm sure. The campaign by the Trump administration and MAGA media in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination to depict political violence as purely a phenomenon of the left raises some obvious questions. Among them, what about January 6th? A pro-Trump mob summoned to Washington, D.C. by the president and incited by his calls for them to fight descended on the U.S. Capitol and assaulted numerous law enforcement officers while sending Congress into hiding. Well, that would surely seem to qualify, says Matt Gertz, and I agree. The answer is that on the right, the January 6th rioters have been reimagined as the good guys. Well, it's a huge and ongoing problem, obviously, but has a slightly different angle on it now. That reminded me of something. What did I want to go to that this reminded me of as I was scrolling through the end of that account? I should open that again. Go down to the bottom. There was something on my way through all of this. I guess the just asking questions idea. I don't know. Now the idea has come and gone, but perhaps Instapaper and the list there will remind me as I scroll through. But if not, I can jump into something else entirely until, the idea comes back around. Well, I don't know. But a couple of other stories that occurred to me. I was just trying to see if I can bring it back to mind, but I guess not. All right. Well, there's another sort of MAGA fever dream out there that has given Donald Trump another opportunity to try to utilize the levers of power. Was it the investigative subcommittee that I was thinking of? I don't know. At any rate, to use the levers of power to take revenge on his perceived enemies. Reuters reported this, and I don't know if I can access the full report, but I just wanted to put out there that this is happening. I'm sure someone else is reporting on it, and it's much more accessible. And perhaps I can find a different report on it on the fly, so that I can give you a fuller accounting of the story. Let's see, The Hill has it. A couple other places that likewise are more accessible. Do you want to use The Hill or do you want to use MSNBC? Why don't we go with MSNBC on this one? Trump presses Microsoft to, quote, immediately terminate Biden administration veteran. This is over at the Maddow blog. That means it's Steve Bannon, and that means we've done well by choosing his report versus anybody else's. For the third time in 3 months, the subheader says, the president has pushed a private sector giant to fire someone he disliked. This time, Lisa Monaco. The Lisa Monaco example is the most serious. Do you remember Lisa Monaco? Donald Trump has complained bitterly about her for years, but late last week, the president went quite a bit further than he has before. NBC News reported Trump said on Truth Social that Microsoft, who now employs Lisa Monaco, should immediately terminate its president of global affairs, Lisa Monaco. Monaco previously held a number of top governmental national security roles, including serving as Deputy Attorney General for the duration of the Biden administration. Monaco began working for Microsoft in July, according to a LinkedIn post. As part of a long and rambling online tantrum, the president condemned Monaco as, quote, corrupt and deranged, which coming from him is really something, before complaining that she will have, quote, access to highly sensitive information in her current role. Trump added, Monaco's having that kind of access is unacceptable and cannot be allowed to stand. She is a menace to the U.S. national security, especially given the major contracts that Microsoft has with the United States government, hint, hint. Because of Monaco's many wrongful acts, the U.S. government recently stripped her of all security clearances took away all of her access to national security intelligence, and banned her from all federal properties. I didn't even realize that was the case. It is my opinion that Microsoft should immediately terminate the employment of Lisa Monaco. Now, you should remember when he says, well, it's not me saying that. The United States government stripped her of her security clearances. Well, that's on your order. Yeah, okay. So he's mad at Lisa Monaco, always has been, and stripped her of security clearances, which apparently was something we allow the president of this country to do. I don't think we knew what we were getting into when we wrote the rules surrounding it, but nobody anticipated Donald Trump, so here we are. And by the way, you should fire her. Why? Because otherwise I'll use all the tools in my arsenal, as we recently alluded to make sure that more money that the government spends with Microsoft is jeopardized. And maybe I'll sue you personally, and you'll have to pay me another $25 million for my ballroom. But in the meantime, you'll settle because you don't want to jeopardize the billions of dollars you're earning on federal contracts. Back to the article, there are a handful of elements to this that are worth keeping in mind, starting with the fact that there's simply no reason to take any of Trump's hysterics related to Monaco seriously. What's more, this is an important reflection of the president's authoritarian vision. He's not just the president of the United States, he also sees himself as America's CEO, which he apparently believes affords him great influence over the nation's private sector. A developing theme for us here on the show. NBC News reports, their report noted, it is highly unusual for a president to call for a company to fire a private citizen from their job. That's true, or at least it used to be true. The president recently has called for the ouster of Intel's CEO, for example, because of something Trump saw on Fox Business Channel. And around the same time, he suggested Goldman Sachs should replace the bank's top economist because, is it Jan Hatzius? Is that right? Disagreed with the White House on tariffs, as most people really do. Now, Monaco joins a growing club. 3 instances in 3 months might not sound like a lot, but remember, that's the number for every other modern president combined. Remember that the number for every other modern president combined was 0. So 3 by comparison to 0, well, that's really something, at least in the last 3 months. One sentence in the Republicans' online rant particularly stood out for me, says Steve Bannon, and that is, she is a menace to U.S. national security, especially given the major contracts that Microsoft has with the United States government. Putting aside that Trump tried to smear Monaco without cause, his reference to Microsoft's government contracts opens a radical and dangerous door. Would the president use his office to steer contracts away from the tech giant unless and until it agreed to fire someone he doesn't like for political reasons? Given his track record, is such a possibility really all that hard to believe? No, it's not. And that's the clear implication of it. And I'm glad that Steve noticed it and pointed it out. It's worth keeping in mind at the very least. All right, let's see. Other things that I have marked for sharing. What's this one here? Oh, there we are. It's the same story. It's a Blue Sky post that led me to that story, just in case I wanted to, in case I wasn't able to read you the story. But I think Yashar Ali may have taken a screenshot, perhaps, of the Reuters story and shared it with everybody. Oh, no, it's Donald Trump's Stupid Truth Social post. That probably we don't need to see. I'm sure it was extensively quoted in many of the reports on the story. All right, so let's see. Back over to the other side on this thing. Oh, yeah, we did get to play that. We didn't finish playing the clip, but we got to the heart of yesterday, just in the nick of time, the clip from Fox Business, speaking of what he's been watching inside the White House, of Maria Bartiromo's interview with Andrew McCarthy, the Fox Channel legal analyst, who just tells her point blank, yeah, the case against James Comey is BS and it ought to be dismissed. And she does her best to play along and try to salvage the situation, but it just doesn't go anywhere. All right. Let's see. A couple of other items worth perhaps putting on record. I'm going to scroll back to the top and start my search over again. Let's see. Oh, yes. The latest on Stephen Miller, the guy who's actually president of the United States. I suppose you could say the acting president, or he's certainly acting as president, whether or not he holds the title. I know that's supposed to devolve to J.D. Vance in the case of the disability of the president, but what if it never reaches the president? What if Stephen Miller's been holding it the whole time? I thought it was very interesting to read from The Guardian. I read it yesterday. Did it get published yesterday? We'll go find out. Yes, it did. Hugo Lowell, the Washington bureau, is he the bureau chief for The Guardian? Stephen Miller takes leading role in strikes on alleged Venezuelan drug boats. That too, by the way, back in the news. Not that thankfully, I don't think we've struck another one of those boats in the last day or two. But lots of reports emerging from Venezuela. I don't know how much credibility you can give them. This is certainly the kind of response you would expect to see the Venezuelan government trying to center, whether they were true or not, quite honestly. But reports beginning to emerge from Venezuela of people who are saying that family members who were out fishing in the Caribbean in the vicinity of these strikes who have not returned from their normal, regular, just totally legal fishing trips, which, maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe they did return, maybe they didn't. Maybe this is a story made up out of thin air, maybe it's not, but this is what they're putting forward, and this is exactly what you would expect to see put forward, that, yep, they were out fishing, and now they're gone, and no one knows why, and of course the United States continues to produce no evidence whatsoever of any aspect of the story that they're telling about the destruction of these boats, that they were carrying drugs, that the people were gang members, none of this stuff. And by the way, the weird discrepancy between the first strike and then all subsequent strikes. Well, we blew this boat up because why were there 11 people on it? That seems weird. So obviously it's evidence of drug activity. And then, of course, blowing up 3 more boats with 2-man crews on board or less, and possibly in some cases, and saying, yeah, right, same story. Drugs, obviously drugs, because 11 or 2. Whatever, the point is that there's a person on this boat, and so that, therefore, means we should blow it up. Well, anyway, as it turns out, Stephen Miller is taking a leading role in these strikes on alleged Venezuelan drug boats. The subheader says it's an exclusive. Miller's Homeland Security Council has played a key part in coordinating operations, sources say, to the extent that those operations could be said to be coordinated. Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, not even the Chief of Staff, he's a Deputy Chief of Staff, has played a leading role in directing U.S. strikes against suspected Venezuelan drug boats, according to 3 people familiar with the situation. At times, his role has superseded that of Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, which, an interesting choice for who he supersedes. Like, what about Secretary Hegseth? Does he not have a role in this use of the military? I don't know. I guess it doesn't matter too much. Stephen Miller shouldn't be doing any of this stuff. But before I lose the opportunity to point this out, to the extent that this article, there's a lot to it. To the extent that this article is being offered to establish the point that Stephen Miller seems to be able to exercise control over actual kinetic use of, to borrow a term, of the U.S. military, killing people in boats in international waters, in territorial waters of Venezuela, with all sorts of claims of that he's using to justify it. But what is the Deputy Chief of Staff doing with his hands in any of this stuff? Shocking enough to find out that he's directing the use of the military to kill people in and around Venezuelan territorial waters. But I remind you, in case you have forgotten, right? Like here, the story seems to be, let me jump back. This one, the story is directly on his ordering or having a hand in ordering these attacks. And given the stories we've heard over the last couple of days of Donald Trump saying, questioning, am I seeing things on my television that aren't really true and don't actually depict what's happening in Portland? Oh, maybe. And, various other instances in which it's become clear that he's not actually entirely engaged in what's going on. Pete Hegseth's meeting. I thought it was for foreign military. If it's my generals, I'm going too. Not quite connected here, right? But this story, I think, ought to be read alongside the throwback to Signalgate, which has its own throwback that I'm going to try and connect here too. But you remember the Signalgate story, and remember it was generally digested here in the United States and probably around the world as haha, LOL. What a bunch of idiots. They included a journalist accidentally in the group Signal chat. Problem number one. And then, of course, problem number two, Hegseth very unnecessarily and very stupidly sharing operational details, in real time about the operation that puts American military service members in direct jeopardy. I'm going to talk about what jets are going to be flying where at what time to pull off what mission. Not something that would be necessary to brag about inside of this Signal chat of very connected people. So really no point in telling them any of this. But in addition, of course, they included the journalist and how stupid and how counter to normal security operations this is. But actually, I think maybe perhaps if not the bigger story, the more frightening story buried in that was, if you remember the actual story in the Atlantic about it, Stephen Miller's role in the Signal chat was essentially to assure all of the others whose role it was to actually execute this attack in Yemen that it was A-OK to go ahead, to green light, to actually use that term, to green light this attack. And remember how it was done? That basically it was questioned, like, are we sure this is what we should be doing? Is this okay to go ahead and do it? Do we have the necessary authorization to do this? And Stephen Miller was the one who answered, and I think maybe it was even Marco Rubio who asked the question. And Stephen Miller said, yeah, go ahead. And remember how he put it. He's like, my understanding of things, from what I'm hearing from the president, it's a green light. It's a go. And people began wondering, what does that even mean? From my understanding, what I heard, what I'm hearing from the president, like, you're the Trump whisperer now. He's in there yelling at the TV, and it's Stephen Miller saying, by virtue of the power vested in me as deputy chief of staff of the White House, which is to say none, I totally heard the president say, yes, go ahead. And nobody stopped and said, well, I need to hear it from the president. They just said, Miller says it. He's got no reason to lie. Sure he does. Of course he does. But maybe he's not, but he certainly has every reason to lie. So this is an interesting throwback. And of course, that reminded me a great deal of the situation with the recording of the Republican House leadership back in 2016, when the thing everybody ha and remembers is Kevin McCarthy saying he thinks Putin pays Trump. And yet I've been trying mightily to get everybody to recognize that the real story here is that what this is a recording of the House Republican leadership saying, I just met with the Ukrainian leadership. They've traveled all the way from Kyiv here to the United States to give us a warning in person, not only about Russian ambitions in Ukraine, but Russian ambitions across the West, that they are going to be conducting disinformation campaigns and actual on-the-ground military campaigns to destabilize Western Europe and possibly the United States and possibly elsewhere in the world, Western-style democracies everywhere. And that they, agreed and recognized that it was true, and in their words, diabolical, and that they needed to be doing something about it, and that they all believed that the United States was doing something about it until Kathy McMorris Rogers reminded them, you know what, we're not actually doing anything to stop it. As a matter of fact, the conversation then ends with Paul Ryan saying, well, we're all going to keep this on the hush-hush because, as it turns out, Russian interference in our election results, most likely, it's going to help us. It's going to result most likely in a Republican win of the White House. We'll retain Congress. And never mind that the plan is diabolical, we'll actually end up being on Russia's side, although, these guys don't conclude that at that point. But again, the big story that everybody took away was, he says Putin pays Trump. That's probably true. I can't believe he admitted it. But yeah, meanwhile, look, the story is an early warning about Russia, what they're up to in Ukraine, how the Ukrainian government went out of their way to warn American leadership, and how American leadership threw those warnings overboard in exchange for help winning the 2016 elections. That's a serious misreading of the story, and everybody comes away with the ha-ha line instead of the serious line. Similarly, in Signalgate, everybody comes away with the ha-ha line and ignores the fact that Stephen Miller is ordering direct use of the American military to kill people overseas. And because he got away with it in Yemen, it turns out he's doing it again in Venezuela. At least this time, there's no ha-ha distraction to go to. The strikes on the Venezuelan boats allegedly carrying narcotics, Hugo Lowell continues, which the administration has claimed were necessary because interdiction did not work, have been orchestrated through the Homeland Security Council, which Miller leads as the Homeland Security Advisor, even though none of this is happening in Homeland. Miller empowered the HSC earlier this year to become its own entity in Donald Trump's second term. Oh, he empowered it, did he? With what power that he holds on his own? None? Oh. Well, what the hell? Anyway, so, Miller empowered the HSC earlier this year to become its own entity in Donald Trump's second term, a notable departure from previous administrations, where it was considered part of the National Security Council and ultimately reported to the National Security Advisor, but just doesn't now. As a result, the HSC has taken the lead on engaging the Venezuelan boats, the People said, a situation evidenced by his top deputy, Tony Salisbury, and the others being the gatekeepers to details about what boat to strike until they are about to occur. That was the case, for instance, with the second Venezuelan boat hit with the Hellfire missiles on September 15th. While the White House was informed the Pentagon had identified the boat as a viable target more than 4 days before, many top White House officials only learned of the impending strike hours before it happened. A White House spokesperson said in a statement the strikes were directed by Trump, saying he oversaw all elements of foreign policy. The entire administration is working together to execute the president's directive with clear success, the statement said. But the previously unreported role of Miller and his massive influence with the president and his elder abuse of the president also explains how striking Venezuelan boats became a major priority and why Trump has been happy to deploy extraordinary military force in the region. The U.S. military presence presently involves the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group, including the USS San Antonio, US Iwo Jima, USS Fort Lauderdale, all carrying 4,500 sailors, and the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit with 2,200 Marines, The Guardian has previously reported. Miller's role also opens a window into the dubious legal justification that has been advanced for the strikes, which has been a matter of deep controversy amid allegations that amounted to extrajudicial murder in international waters, which, used to be problematic. Since the start of the Venezuela campaign, White House officials have sought to justify the strikes internally and externally by claiming Trump was exercising his Article 2 powers, which allows the president to use military force in self-defense in limited engagements. The self-defense argument revolves around Trump's designation of Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization. A claim advanced by Miller, of course, in order to defend the deportations of dozens of Venezuelans earlier this year under the Alien Enemies Act. The administration claimed that Tren de Aragua had infiltrated the regime of President Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, and so the presence of the cartel's members in the U.S. amounted to a predatory incursion by a foreign nation, allowing for the deportation of any Venezuelan national. You see how much bootstrapping they're doing on these claims? It is a drug cartel that is running Venezuela, Miller told reporters at the White House earlier this month, as he characterized Maduro as the head of the cartel. It is not a government. It is a drug cartel, a narco-trafficking organization that is running Venezuela. But the administration has yet to provide concrete evidence that Tren de Aragua has become an instrument of the Venezuelan government, and legal experts contacted for the story said the White House could only justify the strikes if it could make that showing. But what if they just said F it and did it anyway? Oh, okay. A divided 3-judge panel at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit on September 2nd ruled that deportations under the Alien Enemies Act were unlawful because the administration hadn't met that high burden of showing that Tren de Aragua was an arm of the Maduro regime. It remains unclear who signed off on the legal justification for the strikes. No one knows. Neither the HSC nor the National Security Council have dedicated legal advisors like in previous administrations after the White House started restructuring the National Security Council in May. Interesting restructuring. Get rid of the legal council, huh? But multiple people said it was approved by the Pentagon General Counsel, Earl Matthews, who was until recently a Trump White House lawyer, the Justice Department, and the White House Counsel's Office, which has a lawyer tasked with handling National Security Council matters. So all three people who were appointed by Trump to legally clear this thing and subject to no oversight and no approval by the Senate all happen to agree, although their jobs depend on it, that everything is A-OK and legal. Isn't that interesting? No, that's fine, but apparently it's being directed by Stephen Miller and the HSC, which has no legal counsel whatsoever. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting. Anyhow, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy right here, of course, on Netroots Radio. And by the time we speak to you tomorrow, we'll know whether the government is shut down or not. And, well, that'll be real interesting. Like I said, I think they're looking forward to a shutdown in the White House. They think it actually means, well, if there's no appropriations laws in place, there's no laws in place at all. And my Article 2 inherent powers say I can withhold anything I want and maybe spend anything I want, too.
You have been
That's the thing to look out for.
Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
All right, do stay tuned for Justice Putnam. Of course, coming up next, I'm a little slow on the draw, so I can't get to the summary that he has prepared for us very carefully. But like I said, in advance of the shutdown, something to watch out for. I think Trump just thinks that inherent powers take over at this point. He may even mint the coin overnight and mint one for himself while he's at it. We'll see. See you tomorrow.